Hello, Spink here. This is episode 2 of my Let's Play of AGEOD Civil War 2. It looks like it's becoming a bit more of a tutorial than I had originally planned, but that's not a bad thing, I guess. This episode is going to cover supply, which is one of the most important aspects of this game, in my opinion. And here we go. Okay, supply. Supply, I think, is actually more important than command. Even command is pretty simple. I mean, it doesn't take much to get your head around how that command system works and what you need to do about that. Supply is the biggie. This is the thing that's going to drive everything, especially if you're the South and you're playing with the more advanced rules. Every unit is going to require a certain amount of supply per turn to to remain effective, to not take losses. And it's dependent to a certain extent on the type of unit it is. But generally, if we take a look at, say, a single guy here with these little chevrons represent, these are the number of elements it has in its makeup. This is a brigade. These are the regiments that make up the brigade. Generally, each one of these is going to require 2 supply points per turn. That's what it will burn through. So, if we look at our full army here, the Army of Northeastern Virginia, we go and hover over the supply icon here, and we can see that we are going to use 133 supply per turn, which is a lot. I mean, this is an army, so we're going to use a good chunk of supply here. And your current stock is 699. That means that this particular stack is carrying that amount with us. Military units, the infantry, the artillery, and the cavalry, they have a supply capacity of 2 turns worth of supply. So whatever their supply usage is per turn, they will carry double that as a maximum. And any additional that you want to have in your stack after that is going to be by these supply wagons. These supply wagons, if you click on one here, each one of these companies can carry 20 supply. There's 2 supply units, I believe, that you can make. There's the full 4 company units, and I believe there's half strength ones with 2 companies. But anyway, these guys are going to carry with us 80 supply. So if we go back to our army here, we take 133 per turn. So basically, one of these supply wagons is not even going to provide 1 turn's worth of supply for us. If we have 2 of them, that's going to take 1 turn's worth of supply for us. So this is something you really need to keep in mind when you're moving through enemy territory where you're not getting supply to you. The larger your force, the more supply you're going to have to bring with you. You can live off the land, but it's pretty limited. So let's look at what we need to think about in terms of supply. If we go to the overlays here, these are extremely useful, by the way. I use these all the time. They're hotkeyed 1 through 8. 1 is the military control. 2 is the supply. 3 is control, shows you the strategic towns. 4 is the various allegiances of any particular region. 5 is the state overlay, which it can help you get oriented as to where you're at, since it's pretty faint showing what the state boundaries are. Theaters of operation, I've never used this. I don't really see hardly any use for that. Here's a simplified terrain overlay. This is really helpful to get your head around exactly what the terrain is doing. And weather. This will become extremely critical. So this is the one. The ones that I use a lot are the weather overlay, the supply overlay, and the military control overlay. But we're considering we're talking about supply right now. So let's hit this, the supply overlay. That's the 2. I'm actually gonna get rid of that little thing, and I'm going to use the hotkey 2 on and off because it's just easier for me. And this is one of the most important tools that you have in this game. This shows where you can get supply to your units and where you can't. For instance, down here, this color is the Confederacies, where they can get supply through. The green is where we can get supply through as the Union. And these flashing regions, these are your important things here. These are regions that you have a depot in. These are the regions that you're stockpiling supply. And that's the big thing, depots. Normally you have various, let's pop that off, you have in your towns, in your cities, let's just take a little city like Lancaster. I'm going to control click, which lets me see what's in the city. This is a level 4 city, and it's producing 31 supply every turn. So it's producing that supply, but it doesn't stockpile that supply. You're not going to see a large stockpile of supply here. He's got 31 here. He's going to basically stockpile no more than he can hold there for the most part. I could be mistaken on that, but well, here's York has got a bunch, so I'm kind of full of it. But this is the thing you need to consider. Supply comes from your towns. Harrisburg up here being a state capital, that's going to have some good stuff. This has got a depot that is producing 5 per turn. The state capital is producing 6 per turn. This arsenal is producing 32 per turn. And the Harrisburg city itself is 31. So this city all by itself is producing 100, nearly 100 supply. And what happens during the supply phase of each turn is the various military units and depots will pull supply from sources and transfer them along the various links in your supply train. So a military unit will pull supply from where it's in and attempt to pull supply from the nearby regions. So every turn, this army is going to pull as much supply out of Fairfax as it takes to fill him back up to maximum. So he's going to use 133 per turn, and then he's going to grab 133 out of this this region. And here we have a depot and Alexandria itself. The defenses provide a small amount here, but this all by itself, 21, 23, 25. This region all by itself is producing 25 supply points, and this force requires 133 per turn. So obviously this region all by itself cannot support this unit. We've got to be pulling supply in from adjacent regions and farther back. And the depot is what's going to allow us to stockpile supply, to build up our supply for our operations, whether offensive or defensive. You want to make sure that you have supply capability there, and you want to defend that supply lines from enemy raiders and whatnot. If you've got a nice line of depots that's given you your supply lines, you want to protect that so that raiders can't come in there and tear it all up. So that's the gist, the basics of it. If you look here, when you pull up the supply overlay, you'll see that, let me get out of here, that the tooltip has changed, whether it's on or not. You'll see we now have additional entries here for supply and ammo received and sent. Now those are 0 at the first turn of the game because we haven't gone through there, but these will allow you to see how much supply is coming through any particular region you're in, and you'll be able to gauge whether you have enough throughput in your supply system for whatever size of force you have trying to get through here. Say all the planets align and we knock Beauregard out of here and we start heading to Richmond. We're going to need to keep into account that this army requires 133 supply every turn. So we're going to need to extend our supply line down here. These are not panzer divisions. We're not going to be able to just dash down and do stuff. We're going to need to be quite methodical in how we advance so that we ensure that we have this supply coming through every turn that we're going to need to do. Because if we run out of supply, our strength is just going to melt away. You'll see these units, if you click on a unit itself and then click on it over here, it'll bring up this nice little display where we can see everything about our unit. Well, hits right here, this tells how many hits this unit, these are essentially like hit points, how many hits this unit can take before it disappears. And we'll have a similar thing with cohesion, and these correlate to these two bars right here. The red bar is our hits, right here it's full because we still have 20 of 20, and the blue bar is our cohesion, which is a 66. And what cohesion is, that's your disorganization. So as you move and have straggling, as you engage in combat and have your units start to come apart, get disorganized, your cohesion is going to go down. So when your cohesion is maximum, that's when everybody is in their place, all of the leaders know where everybody's at, and then your maximum combat ability. And as that goes down through what I've just described, it's gonna have a direct impact on your power. So I'm not sure if it's exactly a 1-for-1. So like if we're at 33 out of 66 cohesion, I think we can expect our power here to be about half. But I haven't looked at that specifically. Here's something that shows up real quick while we're looking at this. This 144, that's our combat power. You'll notice as we hover over that, you can see that the name at the bottom of our units now changes to a display of how many troops and horses and guns they have, which is kind of interesting. I wish they kind of had something at a higher level where we could see, through this pop up, for instance, the number of troops we had, because that's really what people at the time thought about. There's 25,000 troops here. They never said, well, that's a power of 1,221. But that's what we got. So, but anyway, now that's the gist of what you need to supply. And over here in the east, it's not really a huge deal because there is this area here is so built up. The infrastructure is so good. You have railroads, you have roads, you have all of these levels or regions are so built up that you're not going to have a big problem with supply getting through here. Contrast that with, say, West. Whoops, what did we do here? Did I do something? I think he's all right. West Virginia over here. So if we hit this, now at the time that we're looking at here, West Virginia wasn't actually a state. It was part of Virginia, and it seceded from Virginia to become West Virginia. But at this time, it's in the game, it's West Virginia. When actually it really wasn't quite yet. I think it was 1863 or 1864 before it officially became West Virginia through an act of Congress, but I don't recall 100%. But anyway, this is the situation. If you look at if we use our terrain overlay, so we can see what the terrain is more easily. All of this is mountains. All of this is hills, and you'll notice we don't have the built-up areas that we do in the lowlands over here. So, what's our supply situation look like over here? This is going to be much more important in your less developed areas. You're really going to have to pay attention to your supply. So let's hit 2 and bring up our supply overlay and take a look. Well, what immediately becomes apparent is these Confederate units are in a bit of a bind. We have these flashing depots. We have not only supply sources nearby, our cities that produce supply. We have these green areas so that we can push supply through these areas, including by railroads. We have railroads that are real close by, get them up to this. Well, these Confederate forces here, they don't have that. Not only do they not have supply sources close, they do not control the regions through which that supply needs to come. So Floyd up here in Clarksburg, why he's a fairly good force here, 157 power compared to Bill Roy's 76. So he's probably about double our troop strength. This is a really weak unit, 2 militia infantry regiments and a cavalry regiment, and Floyd here, we can't click him and see his stuff, but we can hover over him and see what if we have sufficient forces nearby, this cavalry unit helps us out a lot to see what he's doing here. But we see that he has 2 infantry brigades, not terribly strong, but and a cavalry brigade that's quite strong, some artillery, and a supply unit. Now this unit all by itself, I would estimate is 2, 4, 8 to 10 regiments in strength compared to our little 1, 2, 3 here. So we have this piddly little unit here that's using 10 per turn. 10 per turn supply. So we got to think that this West Virginia force has got to be using double that, because he's about double our strength as far as we can tell. And he is going to be needing about 20 supply per turn. And if we look at what do we have here in Clarksburg here, or Clarksburg, yes, that's producing 5 supply a turn. So the supply that's being produced in this area is very small compared to the size of this force that's here. So he does have a supply wagon with him. So he has a few turns of supply before things start getting really bad for him, but he doesn't really have a way to get more supply up to this force. So while he's quite strong, their supply situation is such that this is not really tenable for the Confederacy. And if you look at the rail lines that go through this region, they're not going down to the south. This is a problem that the South had, is they just did not have the infrastructure that the North had in being able to move their troops and supplies. So Floyd here, if he wants to stay here, he's going to, each turn he's going to have less and less supply, and eventually he's not going to be able to support this force, and they're just going to start wasting away. So he's got to either get supply up to this unit, or he's going to have to get out of here. One way that you would think he could get supply up through here is if they could get control of this rail line. And if we hit the military control overlay, you can see they do have control over a bit of it here. They have 75%. The military control that's about halfway down in that pop-up tells what the control of any given area is. I believe you have to have over 75% military control to prevent the other side from being able to use the railroads in there. And that can, if we look at the supply overlay, you can see that even though the Confederates control these regions, we can still move supply through there. So that is something that we're going to need to take into account when we start doing our movement in here, is we're going to be able to sustain much larger forces in this area than the Confederacy is. So they're really, I mean, if they want to put a major effort into holding West Virginia, they really don't have the infrastructure to support it. They can throw a lot of troops in here, but they won't be able to support them. And eventually they'll run out of supply and just melt away. Especially if they once winter hits, it's not gonna be a good sight for them. And we have a similar situation if we look out into Missouri. A similar thing going on. If we pull up this is our military control. You can see that the Confederacy controls southern Missouri. And this is our supply overlay. And you can see they can get supply through this stuff. We've got a couple pockets here of supply, and that's based on probably the Unionist sentiment that they have in the area. But we have Sterling Price up here in Jefferson City, which is the capital of Missouri at the time. He's a pretty serious force here. He's 6 infantry brigades, a cavalry unit, regiment or brigade. It's hard to tell. 2 batteries of artillery and a supply unit. So he is easily double whatever this unit is. and this unit is going to require 14 supply a turn. What do we have here in Jefferson City? Jefferson City 11, 14, 15, 19 a turn. So Jefferson City is not providing enough supply to support price. He does have that the supply wagon with him, so he's got some wiggle room there. But he doesn't have the supply in that area, and they don't really have a line of supply. This isn't bad here. Fayetteville here, I don't believe has a depot. Yeah, it does have a depot. So Fayetteville has a depot, Springfield has a depot, and Rolla has a depot. So supply for the Confederacy can come up this river, be stockpiled at Fayetteville, have it pushed forward to Springfield, have it pushed forward to Rolla, and then have it pushed forward to Jefferson City. So I think he could potentially make a go of this, but this is a pretty precarious supply line for someone up there. Nathaniel Lyon, when he becomes active next turn, we're going to bring him down and we're going to take Rolla here, take that depot, and not only is that going to deny the use of this depot for the Confederacy, this is now going to be one that we can take advantage of and start building our supply line as we move down to operate in Arkansas. So we are going to take the Rolla depot, get a build up, wait for proper weather, go grab Springfield. The same way, just boom, boom, boom. It's kind of like island hopping in World War II in the Pacific, but we're going to be doing depot hopping. So we want to make sure that we have a secure line of communications, a secure line of supply that provides sufficient supply for whatever force we're going to be going down there with. Lyon's force currently is 23 per turn supply usage, but I'm sure by the time we're looking at going past Springfield, we're going to be using a much larger force, and it'll be probably early in 1862. So we're going to need to have even more supply capability in this area. If we look at something like a little farther west, we get out to Indian Territory and Kansas and whatnot. We have these lines of forts. Each one of these forts only produces 2 supply per turn, so they really can only support a regiment, so a small garrison, and not much infrastructure, not really any way to stockpile anything, not much way to move it. So whatever we have out in this area, even Lawrence is not awesome, 15, is going to be small forces, limited to small forces out here. You try to move something, a division or larger size unit through this, and you're just not going to have the supply to support that. So we're really going to be looking at throughout Kansas, Indian Territory, Texas, New Mexico, and etc. We're going to be looking at irregular troops and small, just a brigade or two of troops being able to operate, because the supply situation just isn't here to support it. And in the winter it's going to get even worse, because if you're not in a region that has a town in it or a fort or something, and there's a lot of this out here with nothing, if you get in harsh weather and you're not in at least something with a fort, you're going to suffer quite a bit of attrition. And again, that's because of that attrition setting that we set, because I like the way that works. So that's the basics of supply. There is it bears reading up in the manual on it. There's how the supply actually moves from town to depot, and whatnot, and your railroad capacity and your river capacity. It's going to be really important in how you move supplies. So, but that's something that we can expand on as we start moving through things. But that's the basics of supply and what you need to keep, what you need to pay attention to, what you need to keep in mind. So I think we'll call that good for now. All right.